In Mexico, stories of defiance against adversity frequently play out like gripping dramas. A consistent thread emerges from these stories: cartels taking on more than they can handle.
They knew that the Guadalajara cartel members, Kiki, they also knew the involvement of the DFS.
From bustling metropolises to small communities, we see everyday individuals emerge as improbable heroes. Join us as we look at the mind-blowing occasions in which cartels miscalculated the Mexican spirit's resiliency. Here are 5 times cartels messed with the wrong people. Manuel Torres Felix. Manuel Torres Felix, a name lost in the dark records of Mexico's dark underworld, is a character whose life story reads like a tragic epic of violence, betrayal, and spiral into madness. His path, from the pinnacle of cartel power to the depths of his own personal torment, is a sobering reminder of the deadly forces at work in the world of organized crime. Manuel grew up in a society where power was measured in kilograms of illegal substances and loyalty could be bought with a gun. Raised in the wide expanses of Sinaloa, a province known for drug trafficking, he was exposed to the ruthless intrigues of the criminal underworld from a young age. Manuel found his calling in the chaotic landscape of 1990s Mexico, where he joined the Cali Cartel, a gigantic criminal enterprise that ruled enormous territories. With ambition burning in his veins, he advanced quickly through the cartel hierarchy, leaving a path of blood and broken alliances behind him. His ascension was aided by the arrest of his brother, Javier Torres Felix, a cartel leader, which left a power vacuum that Manuel was all too happy to fill. During this period, Manuel formed an unholy partnership with Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, Mexico's most famous mafia lord. They ruled over the lucrative trafficking channels that spanned from South America's jungles to Mexico's borderlands, regulating the flow of narcotics that fed the American market's insatiable thirst. But underneath the surface of power and riches lie simmering tensions that would eventually pull the cartel world apart. In 2008, greed and ambition drove the Cali Cartel and the Beltran Leyva organization into open battle, fracturing their fragile alliance. Manuel, also known as LM1 within the cartel, was caught in the crossfire of this murderous rivalry, his allegiance torn apart by the shifting sands of betrayal. April 18, 2008, marked a watershed moment in Mexico's terrible history. Torres Acosta, Manuel's 20-year-old son, passed away in cold blood after a bold ambush staged by Beltran Leyva organization operatives. The merciless attack, intended to send a message to LM1 and his allies, instead set off a fireball of wrath that consumed everything in its path. Fueled by grief and hatred, LM1 set out on a road of vengeance that would leave a trail of destruction in its wake. In the days that followed, he unleashed a wave of fear on Culiacan's streets, with his troops hunting down Beltran Leyva organization operatives with lethal effectiveness. But LM1's fury did not only affect his opponents. In a terrifying display of sadism, he targeted those closest to him, exposing them to horrific suffering in his quest for vengeance. Among his victims was Roberto Carlos Barceló Villagran, the municipal police commander, whose body showed the gruesome marks of LM1 warped vengeance. As the fatality toll rose and Culiacan plunged into disorder, the Mexican government was obliged to act, sending thousands of soldiers in a desperate attempt to restore order. Even as the forces of law and order closed in on him, LM1 remained elusive, his reputation expanding with each passing day. Finally, a hail of gunshots ended LM1's reign of terror. On October 13, 2012, he was shot after a desperate battle against the forces of law and order, his lifeless body acting as a cruel reminder of the cost of unrestrained ambition and the devastating power of the human spirit. Aljo Garza Damez. On November 13, 2010, in the peaceful embrace of San Jose Ranch, an elderly man stood as a bulwark of defiance against the looming shadows of violence. Aljo Garza Damez witnessed a terrifying ultimatum issued by the famed Los Zetas cartel: abandon his beloved homestead within a tiny 24-hour window or face the prospect of death itself. These agents of chaos had no idea they had awakened a titan in Don Aljo, a man whose resolve and tenacity had been forged in the fires of struggle and persistence. Don Aljo hails from the sun-kissed lands of Nuevo León, Mexico, and his path began in humble beginnings, where the principles of diligence and honesty were ingrained in him from a young age. As the sands of time drew him into manhood, he used these characteristics as a compass to navigate the tumultuous rivers of life with unshakable integrity. With forethought, he turned his hard work and sweat into a profitable venture, culminating in the purchase of 2,000 hectares of fertile property in the green pastures of Tamaulipas. San Jose Ranch, as it became called, grew into the pinnacle of his ambitions, a tribute to his unbreakable spirit and unshakable drive. Thus, when the gloomy shadows of danger hovered over his territory, Don Aljo stayed firm in his determination to protect his legacy at all costs. On November 13, 2010, a struggle began that would forever mark his name in history. Amidst the idyllic tranquility of his ranch, the symphony of pandemonium shattered the peace as Los Zetas cartel emissaries appeared on his doorstep. Their directive was clear: abandon all traces of resistance or face their ruthless retaliation. However, beneath Don Aljo's aged appearance was the heart of a lion, unafraid of malevolent threats. Don Aljo refused to tremble in the face of tyranny and courageously declared his intention to stand his ground, his words reverberating with the steadfast defiance of a warrior ready for combat. "I'll be waiting for you," he said, issuing a call to arms against the powers of darkness. With unyielding determination, he marshaled his resources and rallied his dedicated cadre of workers to his mission. Nonetheless, aware of the danger that loomed over them, he persuaded them to seek safety beyond the ranges of danger, afraid to risk their lives in the heat of fight. Don Aljo fortified his homestead with an arsenal of weaponry and turned it into an unassailable fortress against the tide of evil. Despite the strict gun rules that aimed to squelch his resolve, he waded through the maze of bureaucracy, obtaining permits for a variety of weaponry that would serve as his barrier against the advancing darkness. He meticulously cleaned and prepared each rifle, demonstrating his undying commitment to defending his home and hearth. As the sands of the time wore away, the grim specter of approaching violence grew closer. Don Aljo's stubbornness culminated on November 14, 2010, when a convoy of cartel enforcers swooped onto his ranch in the darkness. However, what they found was not the peaceful submission they had expected, but a violent struggle that rocked them to their core. Bullets ripped through the shroud of night, each firing a fierce rebuttal to the forces of tyranny. Don Aljo, a veritable master of war, created a symphony of pandemonium from within his walled refuge, giving his adversaries the impression of a formidable militia at his command. Despite the barrage of explosives and gunfire, he stayed firm, an unstoppable force in the heart of combat. Hours stretched into eternity as the firefight carried on, a monument to one man's unflinching resolve in the face of impossible odds. As the tide of battle turned against them, the cartel's ranks began to splinter, their resolve failing in the face of Don Aljo's unwavering defiance. With defeat imminent, they made a quick escape, leaving only the ruins of their disastrous foray. Following the skirmish, the peaceful embrace of daybreak heralded a harrowing scene of carnage. Among the ruins of war, Don Aljo stood triumphant, a lone victor in the middle of devastation. His valiant stand had not gone unnoticed, garnering him the respect and admiration of a people plagued by the threat of lawlessness. Don Aljo transcended mortal bounds, joining the pantheon of cultural icons immortalized in history. His name rang across the land, a monument to the human spirit's tenacity in the face of tragedy. Despite his death in battle, his legacy lives on as a beacon of hope in the midst of the increasing darkness of criminality. Mora Chavez. In the quiet community of Llana Michanito, hidden amidst Mexico's beautiful lime orchards and bright plains, life seemed to move slowly. Despite the apparent calm, a dark undercurrent of terror and tyranny surged through the community, thanks to the infamous Knights Templar Cartel. Their iron grip on the region created a long shadow, ushering in a reign of terror characterized by kidnapping, threats, and economic exploitation. Mora Chavez, a tough farmer whose existence depended on his lime trees, saw the cartel as an ever-present nightmare that loomed over everything in his life. Mora's latent wrath only erupted when the cartel prohibited his own son from caring for their lime groves. Isn't it incredible that a father's love and dedication could inspire such a bold uprising against a formidable criminal organization? Mora took matters into his own hands, driven by an unwavering desire to free his village from the cartel's grasp. He gathered a group of like-minded people and established a vigilante self-defense squad, an act of resistance that would forever change Llana Michanito's life. Their voyage was perilous, with each step forward fraught with danger and uncertainty. Despite the odds piled against them, Mora and his colleagues refused to give up, motivated by a strong desire to restore their freedom. Isn't it amazing how ordinary people can come together to face even the most terrible adversaries? They launched a daring attack on the cartel's stronghold, encountering peril at every turn, thanks to sheer persistence and unyielding determination. Their success in driving the cartel out of Llana Michanito was a testament to Mora's bravery and undying dedication to the town. However, their victory was short-lived, as internal strife threatened to destabilize the hard-won calm they had worked so hard to secure. Key officials were jailed and alliances splintered, putting doubt on Llana Michanito's future prospects. Isn't it amazing how quickly victory can lead to chaos and uncertainty? Despite the turbulence, Mora emerged as a constant source of hope, refusing to be swayed by the fluctuating tides of allegiance and betrayal. His steadfast determination acted as a rallying call for those who still believed in the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. And just when it appeared like peace would prevail, a new threat emerged in the form of El Americano, a rival vigilante leader with his own goals. Mora was suspicious of El Americano's objectives and passionately opposed his ascent to prominence, knowing that it would only serve to create more strife and division within their ranks. Isn't it frightening how, even in times of peace, new threats might emerge to undermine the delicate stability we've worked so hard to achieve? Tensions boiled over, ending in a horrific clash that left a trail of death and destruction in its wake. Among the dead were Mora's own son and faithful companions, whose bravery will be honored in the annals of Llana Michanito's history. Even in the face of unfathomable loss, Mora remained steadfast in his quest for justice, utilizing his newfound power to lobby for tighter anti-cartel laws. His unwavering drive enraged rivals such as El Gordo, a former comrade turned cartel lord whose grudge against Mora jeopardized his mission. Isn't it heartbreaking how even the greatest of ideals can attract foes bent on causing damage and chaos? In a sad twist of fate, Mora's greatest fears were fulfilled when he was killed in an ambush, staged by El Gordo, a horrific act of retaliation that silenced one of the cartel's most vociferous critics. As investigations progressed, the truth about Mora's murder became clear, revealing the depths of evil and corruption that had afflicted Llana Michanito for far too long. Despite his death, Mora's legacy lives on as a symbol of resilience and courage in the face of hardship. Isn't it frightening to understand that even in the darkest of times, the light of hope can never be completely extinguished? His memory acted as a rallying call for those who remained committed to continuing his fight, urging future generations to oppose oppression and create a better future for Llana Michanito and others. Subscriber pick. In today's subscriber pick, we will look at the mysterious but funny story of a cartel leader. One individual dared to challenge the current status. Eric Morales Guevara, often known as Señor Thor, emerged as a formidable force against the tyranny of narco-terrorism. Señor Thor's brand of justice, however, was as unconventional as it was successful, gaining him both fame and notoriety in equal measure. Señor Thor's tale began with a straightforward mission: to bring down the Guadalajara Cartel, a giant of organized crime that controlled Mexico. Morales, armed with unflinching tenacity and a persistent pursuit of justice, began on a crusade that would permanently change the landscape of cartel warfare. Morales stood out not only for his tactics, but also for his flair for the theatrical. During raids on cartel strongholds, Morales and his squad humiliated their targets in addition to arresting them. One infamous photo showed a masked operator posing triumphantly next to a suspected cartel shooter who had been made to wear women's underwear, a powerful symbol of emasculation in Mexican culture. It was a blatant act of defiance, a stark signal to the cartels that their reign of terror would not be tolerated. In another raid, Morales upped the ante, conducting a power play that would make even the most daring cartel boss cower in fear. A bloodied prisoner, held at gunpoint by a Marine, stubbornly raised a mallet, a symbol of the Norse god Thor, from whom Morales got his nickname. It was a disturbing scene, one that spoke eloquently about Morales' unwavering determination and willingness to administer his own brand of justice. But Morales did not stop there. Morales staged a daring raid on the residence of famed drug boss Silvestre El Chive Haro Rodriguez, sparking a personal hatred between the two men. Morales did not stop at detaining Rodriguez. He also seized a vase containing the ashes of the cartel's leader-adored father, a symbolic act intended to strike at the heart of his rival. Morales didn't stop there. He vandalized a portrait of Rodriguez's father, scribbling Señor Thor across his face in a brazen gesture of defiance. Kiki Camarena. The abduction and sad demise of DEA agent Kiki Camarena on February 7, 1985, is a harsh reminder of the treacherous and violent world of Mexico's illegal trade in the 1980s. At the time, Mexico was fighting huge drug cartels, with the Guadalajara cartel ruling supreme as one of the country's most fearsome criminal groups. The Guadalajara cartel, led by kingpins Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, exerted enormous power and influence, controlling wide expanses of territory and importing billions of dollars worth of narcotics into the U.S. Agent Camarena had a clear mission: disrupt the cartel's activities and stop the flow of illegal substances into the United States. As a DEA agent stationed in Guadalajara, he was aware of the dangers of confronting such a powerful foe. Camarena, however, devoted himself entirely to the task at hand, motivated by a strong sense of responsibility and a desire for justice. On November 1984, the DEA and the Mexican Army began a large operation to attack Rancho Bufalo, a sprawling ranch run by the Guadalajara cartel. The raid destroyed 5,000 metric tons of illegal substances worth an estimated $2.5 billion, making it the DEA's greatest illegal substance bust in history. The raid's success crippled the cartel's activities and infuriated its leaders, who saw Camarena as a major threat to their unlawful empire. On February 7, 1985, as Camarena went out of the U.S. consulate in Guadalajara, he was ambushed by a gang of armed men suspected of working for the cartel. Despite his brave efforts to resist, Camarena was defeated and kidnapped at gunpoint. He was brought to a remote place and subjected to horrific torture and interrogation for 2 torturous days. Camarena was subjected to unspeakable torture throughout his detention. He was beaten, tortured, and exposed to psychological torment in order to obtain information regarding the cartel's activities. Despite the pain and suffering he faced, Camarena refused to abandon his convictions or compromise his integrity. The news of Camarena's kidnapping sent shockwaves across the DEA and law enforcement agencies in both the U.S. and Mexico. The U.S. administration, appalled by the brazen attack on one of its own citizens, put enormous pressure on Mexican authorities to bring Camarena's captors to justice. Following Camarena's abduction, the DEA launched Operation Leyenda, the greatest drug and homicide investigation ever conducted. Led by Special Agent Hector Bareles, the operation sought to unearth the truth behind Camarena's disappearance and bring his kidnappers to justice. Bareles and his colleagues gradually unraveled the web of corruption and collaboration that protected Camarena's captors from justice through diligent investigative work and the help of Mexican informants. Despite the problems and obstacles they encountered, the investigators remained determined to unearth the truth and put those responsible for Camarena's abduction to justice. Their efforts finally led them to the Guadalajara cartel leaders who were charged with Camarena's kidnapping and murder. Arrests and charges were launched against the Guadalajara cartel's leaders on April 1985, many months after Camarena's abduction. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison for their involvement in Camarena's kidnapping. Regardless of the convictions, Camarena's death had long-term consequences for Mexico's fight against drug trafficking. His terrible demise acted as a rallying cry for law enforcement authorities on both sides of the border, motivating them to step up their efforts to combat drug cartels and bring their leaders to prison. Miriam Rodriguez. Miriam Rodriguez's life was forever changed on that dreadful day, January 23, 2014, when her daughter Karen fell victim to the brutal manipulations of criminal forces. Karen, innocently exploring the streets of San Fernando, was suddenly entangled in a nightmare when armed Los Zetas members seized her from her automobile. Miriam and her family spent weeks dealing with the horrible truth of Karen's abduction. Following Karen's disappearance, the Rodriguez family's lives were thrown into a dark abyss of fear and agony. Days went into weeks, each passing minute filled with painful uncertainty about Karen's destiny. Phone calls from the abductors, loaded with scary threats and false promises, only added to the family's anguish as they frantically hoped for Karen's safe return. Desperate to obtain Karen's release, the family cooperated with the abductors' requests, patiently following orders in an attempt to return their precious daughter home. However, despite their unswerving obedience, the anticipated reunion remained elusive, leaving the family on the verge of despair. As the days turned into weeks and hope faded, Miriam was presented with a harsh reality. Her daughter's condition may be considerably worse than they had imagined. With each passing day, the shadows of uncertainty grew darker, throwing a fog of misery over the Rodriguez family as they faced the unthinkable. Karen's death. Faced with the crushing weight of loss and the prospect of unanswered questions, Miriam made a brave decision: confront the forces responsible for her daughter's disappearance. In a bold action motivated by desperation and resolve, she sought a meeting with a cartel member, hoping against hope to learn even the smallest detail regarding Karen's whereabouts. Despite her earnest attempts, Miriam's desperate gambit generated little discernible results. The cartel member, claiming ignorance of Karen's fate, offered assistance in exchange for a large sum of money, a horrible twist of fate that only added to Miriam's misery. Miriam, undeterred by failures and driven by an unrelenting hunger for justice, started out on a single mission to untangle the intricate web of deceit and brutality that had imprisoned her daughter. Armed with just her ferocious will and unyielding resolve, she went headfirst into the heart of darkness, desperate to confront the monsters that had stolen her daughter. Miriam's search for justice was distinguished by an unwavering pursuit of truth and accountability as she pieced together shards of information and pursued trials wherever they led. Miriam went to great lengths in her pursuit of justice, from tracking down cartel members' social media accounts to staking out their residences. However, her path was fraught with danger at every turn as she bravely and determinedly crossed the dangerous terrain of the criminal underworld. Despite the growing threat of violence, Miriam persisted, inspired by a single goal: to bring her daughter's kidnappers to justice for their horrible acts. Miriam Rodriguez, clutching a revolver in her purse, sprinted past morning crowds on the bridge to Texas. Every few minutes, she would pause to gather her breath, her gaze locked on the photo of her next target, the florist. For a year, she had been on his trail, methodically monitoring him online, collecting information from the crooks he associates with, and even contacting the unwary family to elicit information about his location. Finally, she got a lead. A widow had called to tell her that he was selling flowers on the border. Miriam had been persistently seeking the perpetrators of her 20-year-old daughter. Half of them were already in prison, thanks to Miriam's tenacity rather than law enforcement efforts. She disguised herself as a pollster, a health professional, and an election official in order to collect names and addresses. She made up excuses to meet their families, eliciting information from unsuspecting relatives. Each morsel of information was properly documented and preserved in her black computer bag while she meticulously assembled her case. Miriam was familiar with their daily routines, friends, hometowns, and childhood experiences. She knew the florist had previously sold flowers on the street before joining the Zeta Cartel and becoming involved in her daughter's kidnapping. He was now on the run, having returned to his former trade to make ends meet. Miriam pulled on a trench coat over her pajamas, a baseball cap over her fiery red hair, and placed her revolver in her purse as she raced to the border in pursuit of the florist. On the bridge, she looked about for flower carts, but he was nowhere to be found. He was selling sunglasses. Miriam's enthusiasm overcame her when she finally spotted him, and she approached too closely. He recognized her and escaped. Miriam, then 56 years old, grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him to the rails, slamming her revolver into his back. "If you move, I'll shoot you," she warned him, according to family members participating in her desperate attempt to catch the florist. She held him there for about an hour, waiting for the cops to arrive. Over the course of 3 years, Miriam apprehended nearly every living member of the team responsible for her daughter's kidnapping, a motley crew of criminals who had attempted to recast themselves as born-again Christians, taxi drivers, auto salesmen, and babysitters. Miriam's tireless efforts began to bear fruit as the days went into weeks, then months. With relentless determination and unflinching resolution, she progressively unraveled the intricate web of deception that had captured her daughter, revealing critical clues that would eventually lead to the arrest of those guilty of Karen's abduction. Miriam's pursuit of justice was not without sacrifices, as she faced endless sleepless nights and exhausting days in search of the truth. Despite the personal toll imposed by her dogged pursuit of justice, Miriam remained unwavering in her commitment, driven by a deep desire to respect her daughter's memory and ensure that her voice was not muted. Miriam's brave search for justice was tragically cut short on Mother's Day, March 2017, when she was the target of a violent attempt by freed inmates linked to Karen's abduction. Despite officials' brave efforts to catch her perpetrators, justice eluded her since many of them remained at large, sustaining a cycle of violence and impunity that still plagues Mexico. We hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the next one.